What happens to a parent when the alienator seems so powerful that you start believing the lies about you? When you start allowing your own guilt and shame to take over your life? Hey, this is Ryan Thomas, and in this video, we're going to talk about how alienated parents can often become so caught up in the power and control and lies of an alienator that they even start believing it. So, of course, their kid is going to believe it. We're going to talk about why it is so insidious and also what you can do to break through and to never buy into the lies and the manipulation and to never feel guilty or feel shame in your life. And joining us to help me with that is Jen Ahana, our Get Them Back Mindset and Emotion Coach. Jen, welcome. What a topic.
It's a really important topic. I think every single parent who's been dealing with alienation to some extent has to struggle with a feeling of guilt or shame, because when an alienator can feel so crafty and insidious on teaching you how to think about yourself by what they've done in programming your child and how they think about you, it's one of those things that if you keep hearing the same thing or if you keep experiencing the same thing, what alienators will do very well is they'll do the same things consistently over time and repeat the same story over time. They do that to erode your identity. They do that to erode your sense of actually questioning what's real and what isn't. That's probably the deepest form of how alienation can be really, really effective. And there was a client in particular that we had worked with, though I think we could really reference most of our clients who've had to struggle with this, is she had dealt with decades of guilt and shame over what happened between her and her children, because not only because of the internal demons that she was facing, those internal questions and doubts of, if my child doesn't want me in their life, it transitioned from, this is what the alienator's been doing, this is what they've been saying, this is how they've been trying to mischaracterize me. Over time, when your child doesn't want you in your life, it started to make her question her worthiness as a parent. It started to make her question, oh my gosh, maybe there actually is something wrong with me. Maybe there is something that I did to cause this situation to happen. And I will tell you, if you're a parent that is feeling this, just know that this is odds very likely that it is about the gaslighting that the alienator has done, convincing you that a false story is true. We all have faults, right? We all have things that we could look back on and do differently. But there has been a very systemized approach that one person or a regime has done to create a gap between you and your child. So Ryan, what I'd love to do, I would just love to talk a little bit more about the specific client in particular and the distinction between the guilt she was experiencing and the shame, and how those two things are both separate and really interrelated. So this parent, she was experiencing such a guilt of her son not wanting to have any part of her being in his life, that she would constantly deal with on a daily basis these doubts of going past these past memories and asking herself, oh my gosh, could I have done this differently? Was this a moment where my son started to look at me differently? Were there certain times where I disciplined him and maybe I didn't do it correctly? Did I say the wrong thing here? Did I write the wrong thing in this instance? Did I react in a way that all of a sudden, all of these things that I've done, maybe that's what caused him to want to create a distance, and actually completely almost negating the fact of what the alienator has done. The alienator was so effective at getting her to question her own sense of self that she just began to internalize that and make that a part of her own story and her own reality. What didn't help her is that while the guilt itself was a really internal process, she was also dealing with shame, which is very, very similar to guilt, but shame is about what's happening in the outside world. What happens when you as a parent are talking to coworkers about your child who doesn't want you in their life, or your family or your friends who don't understand that this is an issue? And this mother in particular, she would talk to coworkers and new coworkers that she's getting to know, and they'd ask, oh, like, tell us about your kids. And she found herself just being like a deer in the headlights. And then she would, kind of gently explain, well, this is the situation. This is what's going on with my child. And what surprised her at first is that she wasn't getting necessarily empathy or sympathy about the situation, but she got these looks, these questions, where coworkers who don't understand what parental alienation is, they didn't say it overtly, but she could tell that they were wondering, oh, what did she do something? Did this parent do something to cause a strain between her and her child? Because this isn't natural. Why would a child not want anything to do with you and not want you in their life? And they certainly wouldn't think, why would another parent take such measures to create a gap between you and your child? So it's very natural for parents for you to have to deal with both guilt on the inside and shame from the outside, because you are facing something that, while it really is an epidemic across the world, literally parents in most countries are dealing with this, that it's something that you feel like you're silently suffering and your inner circle doesn't know about. It can make you start to question your own reality.
And that guilt shame loop constantly reinforces itself. The worse you feel about yourself, the more shame when you go outside and you have to deal with the prying eyes and opinions and sideways glances and you must have done something. Kids don't just do this. Adults don't just do this. And then the more that that shame kicks in, the more you feel guilty. And this is the most mind-numbing thing that I hate about parental alienation, is that it is psychological abuse at every level. It is turning the child against you, which is hurting their own self-worth, i.e., you shouldn't love a parent. That parent doesn't love you. That's all psychological abuse. Then it is the psychological abuse that that child is made to inflict upon that parent by rejecting them. So they become weapons that are being used against an adult to hurt you. And then you also have the parent who is gaslighting you, lying about you, trying to shame you, trying to guilt you, trying to make you feel horrible. That is also psychological abuse. And then because you start to buy into it, because you can start to let that creep in, maybe I would be better off if I didn't have contact with a child. Maybe it's better for them. Maybe I should step away. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I don't know how to be a parent anymore. Maybe I never knew how to be a parent anymore. Trigger past instances where other people told you you weren't worthy, you weren't lovable. All of that stuff, you are now allowing yourself to abuse you psychologically, saying things that you would never allow somebody in your life to say to you. And yet you get yourself in front of the mirror all the time, every single day, where you can beat yourself up, where you can buy into the lies. And so, of course, if it can happen to you, of course, your child of any age is going to can believe these things. Of course, they can be influenced. Of course, they can be lied to and manipulated at any age to believe these things, because you recognize, oh my gosh, it's actually happening to me. I'm starting to doubt myself. And you may be watching this and say, oh my gosh, that's absolutely where I've been. You may be having just a little hint of it and saying, oh, I don't like the way that feels, where I'm questioning myself. Or you may be in a position where you say, that's not me, and that's wonderful. But at the same time, if it goes on for months, years, buckle up. It may be coming for you down the road, because there's only so much that a person can take. We're all human. And like you said, nobody's perfect. Nobody's pretending to be perfect. But wow, it is a lot to take on when you're dealing with this. So part of this is also just to let you know, we see you. We hear you. You're not alone. This is wrong. This is wrong what's happening. It's abuse. It's psychological abuse everywhere. And we need to call it out for what it is and say, I'm not participating in that. I'm not doing that. I'm not buying into that.
And not only is this about awareness, right? Is sharing with you, like, we understand that this is a process that is really common. It's a very common, damaging consequence of you dealing with what you currently are. But there's also a way out of it. And there's also a way to completely rewrite your reality. And it's a really beautiful ending with this mom that we've referenced here in this video. She had dealt with decades of guilt and shame. I mean, decades of it, where literally she would hide herself. She wouldn't be social. She didn't have friends. She would dodge questions from coworkers. She just would kind of put her head down and get her work done. She was very successful at her work, but she really hid herself from the world.
Hmm.
And what the alienator wants to do is they want you to hide your light and love is the most powerful form of light. And what's the antithesis to that? Well, hating yourself. It's the darkest thing that you could experience and a lot harder to show your love. So what do you do when you're in this situation? I'll share with you what we did to help her. First, it's showing her a different reality. Please note that I'm not saying it's replacing a reality. You being alienated, we need to acknowledge that that's a reality that you're facing. You feeling guilty and shame, that could feel like a truth within yourself. So we're not going to say, oh, just forget about it. Let's just obliterate that. But we're not going to reinforce that truth. Instead, it's let's look at a different truth. And so for this parent, there were decades of things that she had forgotten about herself, decades of areas of life where she had been successful, decades where she had shown love to her children, decades where she had shown up so unconditional for them, where she supported them, decades of worth where she could see the different qualities that her children have that are the positive qualities that she has, that she passed down to them. There were so many different references of good, so many different resident references of a positive reality where she's had an influence on not only her children, but on other areas of her life, other areas where she's had success, other areas where she has overcome adversity and triumphed. Because our brains get so focused on survival and fear. And when you're dealing with alienation, you're running in such a survival-based state that you become so caught up in a state of fear that you forget all of the good stuff. You forget all of this other beautiful truth of who you are, your ultimate truth, your own character that no one can take away from you. That it was a slow process of actually showing her, here's what's real. Here's another way to look at yourself in the mirror. Here are other memories to focus on. Here are other qualities to live more into. And ultimately, what that turned for her is that allowed her to move away from her guilt and actually realize, one, she didn't do anything wrong. Two, if there were things looking back that she could have done differently, well, guess what? Now she knows what she can do differently. And she's learning and evolving in the process. And guess who's not doing that? The alienator and the regime are definitely not evolving. They are just staying stagnant in a certain place. So all of a sudden, her guilt started to turn into wisdom. What has she learned from her past? How has she triumphed from what she's been through? And how could she get stronger because of it and more in alignment with herself? And now here's the really beautiful domino effect. I mentioned guilt is internal and shame is external. So by her understanding more what her genuine reality is, what's the reality that she's going to identify as her truth, it's powerful. All of a sudden now she could go to her coworkers and rather than say the story of, well, my child doesn't want anything to do with me, we helped her craft a new story. And Ryan, what was so powerful is that we also worked with her on communicating in that place, right? I'm focusing on her internal communication, her dialogue and her self-talk, so that that could reflect out on how she's talking to coworkers about her situation, not as an alienated parent, but as a parent who's reconnecting, as a parent who's becoming a better parent, as a parent who's focusing on bridging the gap with her child. Not a parent who's been alienated for X amount of time, not as a parent who has a son who wants nothing to do with her and reinforcing that identity that the alienator wants her to believe. But by showing her a different reality, she was able to tell a different story. Oh my gosh, please write that down. If you can see a different reality in yourself, you are able to not only believe a different story, but tell a different story to the people in your world. And now shame doesn't become a part of her story because she can talk to her coworkers from a place where she's taking action. She's healing the relationship with her child. She's thinking about it in a very proactive lens of building a new positive future based on what she learned from her past. And all of a sudden now she's starting to build a stronger relationship with other family members who understand her situation better. She has better friendships because they're able to support her, but not be caught in her state of feeling bad about herself. And all of a sudden now other people are approaching her saying, oh my gosh, you've dealt with this, you're dealing with this, I have too. How did you change? How did you build such a different perspective?
Yeah.
And what's really beautiful about her story is after decades of alienation, her healing the relationship with her son started with her healing her guilt and shame and rewriting her reality. And at this stage of us doing this video, her son, who has a wife, she now has a fantastic relationship with his wife. They're in communication all the time. She's keeping him in touch on what's going on with her son. So she feels more connected to his life. And they're slowly starting to rebuild that bridge of trust. And that all started with her building trust within herself and showing her what was really real. again for the first time in what have been decades for her.
Yep. And moving past that guilt and shame that allowed her to do the outreach, not only to her son, which her daughter-in-law sees, and have that communication every step away from guilt and shame and the story that the alienator wants her to believe about herself is a win for her and a loss for the alienator. And that stepping into her own power in that is creating and opening a world of possibilities and opportunities for everyone. Like you said, not just people in her life, but also her son and how she's communicating with him and from the place that she's communicating, but also that open the eyes of his wife, who is now having a relationship and communicating. It busted everything wide open. All of the lies, all of the stories that have been handed down about her to her daughter-in-law, gone, busted. And that's the power of stepping into your own sense of self and remembering your truth and remembering who you are. So I love this, Jen. Thank you so much for your insights and perspective. As always, thanks for everybody for watching, and we will see you on another video.
Hey, it's Ryan Thomas. Thanks so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and it also helps to spread the word. Be sure to watch other videos from this channel, and also check below this video for other resources and links to help.